your life. And I hope that it's impacting you in all the different ways that I feel like God can change your life for the better. God can make you new. God can make you a new person, redeemed through Jesus Christ. And in doing this, I've realized very quickly as I work on messages that it's really hard to do this without getting personal. Because if you're going to talk about changing lives, I mean, what kind of pastor would I be if I just completely neglected how God has changed my own life and give you a little bit of my own testimony? And so I've noticed, I didn't plan it this way, but I've noticed over the last couple of weeks I've been sharing a lot. And it just so happens to be, this is a coincidence, that this theme has started to come up of me being an introvert. I didn't plan it that way. The first week we did change your hashtag, and that was one of my hashtags. You know, hashtag introvert. So I had to talk about it. And then last week I was trying to think of the best story that I had in my own life of where, you know, I had to face fear. And so that came up again with me having to talk to a huge crowd the second time I ever preached. And I had to battle that and overcome my fear. And so today, he came up again. It just happened that way. I was thinking about and I was praying about what God wanted me to say today. And we're going to talk about how you can change your life by being a part of a group. And so it took me back to about 10 years ago. I've just rededicated my life to Jesus. Jesus is calling me passionately. He's making it hard for me to resist. I haven't been to church in like 18 years. And I'm out here at the park at least every other night in prayer. And I've told you about this, trying to get rid of this weird impulse that I was having to change my life. Change your life. And finally I said yes to God. I said, okay, fine, I'm going to seminary. And I started getting my letters of recommendation and all that kind of stuff going and everything. And in the midst of this, I told you about how I told my parents. And my mom completely threw me off of my plan. Because she said to me, you know, Tim, I just saw in the bulletin at our church that they're starting a group for young adults. At this time, I was still considered a young adult. And so I'm like, well, that's nice. Why are you telling me that? And he's like, well, Tim, you say that you're going to become a pastor. And you say that you're going to, rack up all this debt going to seminary. Maybe it might be time for you to actually, intermingle with some fellow Christians. And I was like, there is no way that I'm joining a group. I don't like really even talking to people, especially about my deep stuff, especially people I don't know. And once I get to know you, y'all know I'll talk your head off. You're like, Tim, shut up. But until I get to know you, I really am not comfortable doing that. So I had one of my sessions at the park where I went. This is just kind of what I was going through in my life. That's how I was communicating with God, as I would go alone to a park at night, sit under a pavilion. And one of my favorite Bible stories is a story where Jacob wrestles with God. I haven't preached on that yet. If you hear I'm going to preach on that in a week, make sure you're there. I love that story because that's like my life, basically. And so that night, I was wrestling with God. And I was like, God, I'll preach, I'll do this, I'll do that, but there's no way I'm going to sit down with 10 strangers and talk to them. I don't need to do that. I'm not going to do that. Whatever. So, I asked God to show me if this is something that He really wanted me to do. And I feel like He kind of did, because He brought me to these scriptures, and these scriptures kept coming back to me over and over again. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you're dealing with something in your life, and you ask God for guidance, and He just keeps putting something right in front of you. And so He kept bringing me to these scriptures. And He made it to the point where it was hard for me to say no. So here's what I did. I took a deep breath. I walked up to this house, and the first thing I saw before I rang the doorbell, I'm not making this up, is this big sign that said Roll Tide out front. And I'm like, all right, God, that is my cue. I'm out of here, because I believe in signs and stuff like that, and that was clearly a sign. But before I could leave, the door opened, and like, hey, come on in. I'm like, shooty pooty, oh my gosh, all right, whatever. Once I walk in, and I'm like, y'all, it's going to be hard for you to picture this because I've changed so much in 10 years because God really can change your life. That's a fact. And so it's going to be hard to picture this. But, I mean, at that time, I went in, sat there, didn't say a word. I was scared out of my mind. We're sitting there in a group, and you're not going to believe this. 2/3 of the group was Alabama fans. I'm not kidding whatsoever. I never told them that I was going to seminary. Never came out of my mouth. I never told them that I had any knowledge about the Bible or anything like that. To them, I was just another Joe coming as a young adult to sit here in this group and talk. It was nervous. I had a horrible time, and I left. And I went back to the park that night. And I said, God, I'm not going back. I'm not going to do it. You've given me gifts. You've given me a personality. I think you've given me a gift to preach. You haven't given me the gift to sit in a group of people like that. I'm not going to do it. God took me back to the same scriptures, the same message. And so that's what I want to share with you today. We're going to take a walk, a very, very quick walk through the book of Acts. And I'm going to start in chapter 1. And I'm picking and choosing here. There's all this stuff that's taking place in the book of Acts. Hopefully you've read it. And I'm picking and choosing a couple of verses that I think is going to show you a pattern. Okay? I'm not trying to take it out of context. I want to show you a pattern. So I'm going to start with Acts 1:15. It says, in those days, Peter stood up among the brothers. The company of persons was in all about 120. So this is the upper room prior to Pentecost, prior to the explosion of the church. There's 120 believers in this upper room. Everybody got that? Then, if we go back, we go to chapter 2. And in chapter 2, we have Pentecost happen. And it says this. So those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. That is a great sermon. I hope one day I could preach a sermon and something like that happen. God willing. That would be awesome. So Peter gives this sermon, and 3,000 people give their lives to Christ. 3,000 people. They went from a church of about our size, depending on the Sunday, about 120 people, and they, in one day, turned it into a mega church. So they've gone from this church to the next day having a mega church. Okay, so a bunch of people give their lives to Christ. But what happens next? So let's keep reading. So those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. So we just had a biblical description of what is supposed to happen after you give your life to Christ. Right? This seems like a good place to find that because 3,000 people just gave their lives to Christ. I don't know anywhere else in Scripture where we can see that. So, you don't do what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was to have this personal faith in Jesus. And I wanted to go to the park, and I wanted to have that quiet time with God that I loved. I loved going to the park and sitting there under the stars and just talking to God. And then I was okay if I used my gift, which I felt like was preaching. But I didn't want to do anything else. And so God hit me with this and said, this is what Christians do. Tim, you don't want to have a church that is not a New Testament church. And this is how New Testament churches operate. So what did they do? Number one, they worshiped together. They met. It says they met together at the temple, right? They worshiped together. Everybody came together as a group and worshiped God together. I was really hoping it was going to say that everybody went to the park and prayed in silence. I wanted it to say that. It's not what it said. Number two, they met in homes. Did you see that? They met in homes. All throughout Jerusalem, like that video shown, there was people's doors being opened, and these new Christians were walking through these doors, and they were being discipled. And it says because of that, the faith grew. See, that's one thing we don't know about small groups. Small groups is how you grow a church. I don't think we've ever looked at it like that. But that's what happened in my group, as I'll tell you in a minute, is that, a good group, I don't know how many of you are trying to invite people to worship. A lot of times it's not easy to invite people to church. But you invite people to a group. We're having dinner. Come hang out. Make some friends. You're new here to Enid. Come on. And you'll be amazed 6 months later, they're coming to church. The small group grows the church. Number three, they prayed together. They prayed together for each other, for the movement, for other people that didn't believe yet. Number four, they gave what they owned. They gave. When they joined the church and became a Christian, they started giving. Number five, they fellowshiped together. They fellowshiped together. They loved each other. Now, I want to turn these 5 things around to what that might look like in our church. Go to the next slide. Number 1, Sunday corporate worship. Number 2, home community groups. So all of these people are meeting in homes. And we see this in Paul's letters all over the place. Paul will say something like, tell the church that meets at so-and-so's, give greetings to the people meeting at that person's home. It says that all through. You'll start seeing it if you look for it. So they're all meeting in these home groups, these groups of people that I imagine are loving each other, they're eating together, they're praying for each other, lifting each other up. But then they come together from those groups to a setting like this, and they didn't have air conditioning. And they worship together. Number 3, prayers. Once again, that should be happening everywhere. Home groups plus worship. Number 4, giving. A lot of people don't like to talk about tithing. They say that that's Old Testament, right? That's an Old Testament thing. To people who say that to me, you don't want to say that to me. Because what I say back to you is, okay, do it the New Testament way. I'd much prefer that. The New Testament way is you become a Christian, here's my house. Tithing is fine. And Jesus even says it is good to tithe. Jesus says that. So they give. They give. And because they're all giving, they have the capacity to help people who are in need. Did you see that? Anyone who was in need, the widows, the poor, anyone who had need could come to them because they had all given generously, and the church could reach out and help people like we've done in the past. And then number 5, they fellowship together. Now this can look like, I just threw a couple things up there. It could look like the men meeting and having breakfast. It could look like the women's Bible study, Dawn's Bible study. It could be, you name it. Just name something. They get together and they fellowship together. This is what the New Testament church looked like. So God kind of convicted me and said that, Tim, if you want to have a New Testament church, that's the model. That's the model. And churches, what we've done And it's really switched. If you follow this stuff, in the last few years, it's really switched. What we used to do is church would meet on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Sunday school. Then you'd have other groups that you had to go to, missions that you had to go to. Because we thought if we could get you in church enough, you wouldn't have time to sin out there. Right? But we've come to the conclusion, more and more churches have come to the conclusion of this modern, we call it modern, it's a modern philosophy, but it's really an old philosophy of, can you just come and worship every Sunday morning that you're not sick and that you're in town, and then can you have a home group where you meet and do life with, to where if there's anything going on, if you have a prayer, if anything is happening in your life, you have a group that can support you and love you and hold you up. Okay, let's move forward to the next chapter. Let's go to chapter 4, verse 4. It says, "But many of those who had heard the word believed, and the number of the men came to about 5,000. Now that's growth right there. You know, they reached 3,000 people, and now they've hit 5,000, and that's just men. Who knows how many people were in these? Can you imagine all the different groups? I'm pretty sure that they didn't have a sanctuary that big for all these people in Jerusalem. 5:14. "More than ever, believers were added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women." Multitudes. Do you know what a multitude is? Yes, beyond count. That is exactly right. When you say you have a multitude, that basically means we don't even try to fill Connect cards out. We don't even try to take attendance. We're just not worried about it because it's a multitude. There's too many people to count. Okay, continuing on to verse 28. When the apostles were arrested, the Sanhedrin says this. They say, "You have filled Jerusalem with your teaching." This is what I want to see happen to Enid. I want people to be saying that these people at Westminster have filled Enid with the teachings of Jesus. You can't go through a neighborhood without seeing a few of them out there somewhere. So finally we get to Acts 6. And it says, "Now in these days when the number of the disciples was multiplying." And then in verse 7, "So the word of God spread. The number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of priests became obedient to the faith." This is an exciting time for the church. And I'm just going to end it. I'm going to jump ahead to what I got bookmarked here. In chapter 21, where it says this, "Tens of thousands of the Jewish people have become followers." Tens of thousands. Now you see the model they used. They met together and they met in homes. This is New Testament growth. And to have anything close to New Testament growth, you have to do things a New Testament kind of way. So, I had some questions as I read this. I wanted to know stuff because I'm a pastor. I wanted to know, where did they put all these people? Right? I wanted to know how they kept membership rolls. They didn't have computers back then. I had so many questions come to my mind. What system did they have in place to keep track of all of these people? And I want to go back to Acts chapter 5 in verse 42. Because I think there's a clue here. It says they met day after day in the temple courts and from house to house. So how did they grow? They met in the temple courts. They met house to house. So, in church, there's this constant friction. Some churches are what we call seeker churches. They want to do anything that they can do to bring as much people into the sanctuary because they want to see people saved. They want to see people give their lives to Jesus. And whatever they can do to get them in there is a great thing. Then on the other side, we see churches that are great disciple-making churches. You know, smaller churches that you come in there and anywhere you look, you're going to get fed by the Word. You're going to become a mature Christian. And what we're finding out is you can do both. A lot of really successful churches in today's world are finding out that you can have a seeker atmosphere where all different kinds of people are coming to hear the gospel, but when they get here, and if they give their lives to Christ, you then immediately put them into one of these community groups where they're discipled and loved on and prayed for and raised up in the faith. If they slip, they have a brother to come back up. Because too many times in our world is people will come to church and they'll say yes to Jesus, but then 3 months later they've disappeared. And that's what we don't want to have happen. So temple courts, this is in the temple. There's these big courtyards that were surrounding the temple. Only the high priest could go to the middle of the temple, but in the courtyard. So what I'm envisioning is, it says plural, courts. They have multiple services, multiple venues. I mean, they've got tens of thousands of people. I can imagine, maybe my imagination is getting away from me, I can imagine Peter over here holding a service, preaching the gospel. Maybe Andrew is his singer, is doing like Mitch over here next to him. And then over here, John is preaching, and Bartholomew, he had a nice bass voice and he was letting it rip. But then they met house to house. They met house to house. So I want to put a quote up here from Rick Warren. Anybody have heard of Rick Warren? Very influential pastor from California, started a huge church, and I read a couple of his books. We're very different in a lot of ways, but he's a smart man. And he says this, and this struck with me. He says, this dual strategy of large group worship and small group fellowship in homes is the biblical strategy and structure for the church. Not just back then, but for today. Saddleback's secret of growth for 31 years, we have met in temple courts and house to house. He's saying we create worship services that are going to attract people. We do everything we can do. We don't leave any stone unturned. If there's something, we may fail a bunch, we may throw some stuff at the wall and some of it doesn't stick, but we're going to try everything we can think of to get people into this place. But once we do, we're going to make sure that they're meeting house to house and that they're being discipled. So, I wrestled with God about this. And I think God didn't think that He had it really gotten through to me, so because He put one more verse up here from 1 Peter. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Now, on the surface, that's a scary verse, right? That's not one of the verses that we like to put up on the wall, in our homes. Because it's kind of scary. But it became more scary one night when I was watching the Discovery Channel. And I actually figured out how lions hunt. Because I just thought, they're big, fast creatures. They just run up and jump on a zebra, and that's it. That's my silly mind. But here's what a lion does. First of all, they're smart because they let the women hunt. The women do the hunting. The men get to stay home and sit up there on the rock and just observe. I love that model. I think that's what we should put into practice. I love it. But besides that, this is what happens. The female lion creeps up through the grass. Just creeps. And that's why they're yellow. Because the grass they hunt in is yellow. So they're camouflaged. And they just creep up. And they're made with these paws that takes the sound and gets rid of it. And so they get closer and closer to whatever they think that their prey is going to be. And as they get close, they actually put their paws up like this, so that their prey, when it starts to get too close, still can't hear them. And they hunch down, and they get like this, and they get closer and closer and closer. Until finally they're so close that they're almost doing like a belly thing. And they get to the point where they're just like right there in the middle of those chairs is where the prey is, and they're sitting here like this. And at that moment, when the prey is least expecting it, the prey doesn't know that the lion's been doing this the whole time, trying to get into position to take them. At the least moment, the lion will jump out and the prey will start running. Another thing I found out watching the Discovery Channel I didn't know, lions aren't that fast. They're not like cheetahs. They're really not that fast. Believe it or not, all their prey can outrun them. But this is what they do. They jump at the prey, and the herd starts running. What the herd doesn't know is they start getting away from the lion, is on the other side, another lion has done the same thing. And on the other side, another lion has done the same thing. So as the herd starts to run away, the next lion will attack, and the herd will have to change directions. And the next lion will attack, and the herd will have to change directions again. And they'll keep doing this until one of the herd is too slow and is not up to speed with the rest of the herd, and that one will fall behind. And as soon as there's any kind of separation between the rest of the herd and the one, the 3 lions jump on the one and they bring it down. Our enemy hunts like a lion. He will not come up to me from a distance and growl and say, I'm about to charge you. Be ready. Our enemy will sneak up through the weeds as we're going through our life while we're eating our food, just like those animals. And when we least expect it, he will jump out at us. And who is the ones that he's going to get? The ones that have broken off from the group. Our weakest people. That is why small groups are so important. Everybody thinks that you have it all together and that you come to church and that you're here and nothing bad is going to happen to you, that nobody's going to bother you. But guess what? It doesn't happen. Life happens. Every single person that becomes a member of the church are becoming a member for life. They have no ill intentions. But life happens. They go on vacation, and the Sunday they come back from vacation, they get sick. And the next Sunday, something happens, and before you know it, they've been separated from the group. Churches are changing directions very quickly in today's world. And if we're not careful, we will change directions too quickly, and one of the people we love will fall behind. That's why the New Testament model is for everyone to be in a group. And so I went to this group. And I'm not going to lie to you. The first month or two, it was hard. I sat there, never said a word. I don't know what they thought about me. I never said a word. And back then, I take, oh my gosh, praise God for Allegra. Whew. But back then, I didn't know about Allegra. And I would get allergies like once a week, like really, really bad, to the point where I would be so, like I couldn't think. And there were a couple of Sundays where I would be sitting there in the chair, just with my mouth open like this, and they had to have thought, that I was completely crazy. At one point, I let it slip that I was in seminary. And the leader of the group, Karen, she came up to me and said, Tim, I'm not going to be here next Sunday. You're in seminary. I need you to lead this group. I couldn't think of an excuse to say no because I'm in seminary. I should be able to lead a small group. So I lead it. And it goes awesome. And it happens again a month later, and I lead it, and it goes awesome. And I start coming out of my shell a little bit. I start talking more even when I'm not leading it. And the next thing you know, Karen is coming up to me with a couple of the other people and saying, Tim, you do this. I just wanted to have a group of young adults at the church. I don't know how to do this. You do this. And so I went from being there and sitting there and doing nothing to leading the group. And then the group started to grow. And before you know it, people that weren't coming to church were coming to the small group. And then they started going to church. And God used that in such an amazing way. And He used me in a way that I could not imagine being used. And as I was praying this week, I think more time went through before I wrote this sermon than any other time since I've been a preacher. I wrote this 2 days ago. And because I just didn't know what to say. And I remembered this book that they gave me the day that I left to become the pastor of my first church. And I just want to read a couple of these to you. It says, Tim, thanks for all of your dedication to us. Your spirit will be a part of my life story now, and I'm so grateful. I wish you happiness wherever God places you. Dear Tim, I can't thank you enough for the time and dedication you have given to our small group. It has been inspiring and educational, and I feel like I have learned and grown so much over the last 2 years. I know God has amazing plans for you and through you. Tim, thank you so much for your dedication to our group. Your giving spirit and unbelievable knowledge is inspiring to all of us. We will keep you in our prayers as you begin this new journey. I am certain that you will touch and inspire many lives as you serve God, wherever He places you. Even Oklahoma. I put that in. We wish you all the best. Thanks again for all you have taught and opened our eyes in these past couple of years. Tim, thank you for your sharing your love of the Lord, for the many, many hours you have spent preparing and giving our lessons, and for your dedication. Most of all, for stepping up to be a leader, not only in this group, but in the church. For answering yes to God's call on your life to serve Him as a pastor. Many prayers over you as you take this next very exciting step. Blessings over you and your ministry. Tim, it's been such a blessing for us to have been able to watch you during this journey. We remember thinking back when you would sub for Karen that you would be an amazing preacher. We were so excited to find out that you had answered that call. When you stepped up to lead the class, we had no idea where you would end up taking us. Your dedication and commitment to the class is amazing. We have grown so much spiritually. Thank you so much. You will be greatly missed, but we know God has great plans for you. Know that you will still be prayed for as you start this new chapter. God bless and good luck. Tim, thank you so much for all you have and I will continue to do for our class. You have taught me so much, and I'm truly grateful for everything you've brought to us. I pray that the Lord blesses you. I'm not reading these to try to make myself look better. I think I've spent the rest of the message making myself look like an idiot. I say this to show you that I know it's scary to become a part of a group for the first time. But God's work happens in a home where 8 or 9 people sit together. And I can tell you, I'm friends with all of these people on Facebook, and I still talk to them, still get advice from them. That is where you're discipled. We want you to come to worship. We want you to encourage each other here and sing and lift up God and be with your fellow Christians. But I want you to join a home group so you can do life with people. Because I think that is where true change, if you want to change your life, that is where true change is going to take place. And there are tons of people. We heard 2 of them, but there are tons of people who could stand out here and testify to that. So this is what I'd like everyone to do. I would like you to take a Connect card out and fill it out the way that you always do with your information. But if you feel God telling you to join a group, I want you to write that on the card. I would love, we already have a few of them going, I would love to start a whole bunch of new groups. Every single person in this room deserves to be loved on, to be prayed on, and to be built up in the Word. So if you don't have a group, please put down on your card that you're willing to join one, and we will get those started. Just take a couple minutes to do that now.